Hello everybody and welcome to N64 Magazine Time Capsule episode 5. For those of you that have been a fan since the start, thank you for your continued support. But for those of you that are new to this show, a few quick tips. If you watch the show in full HD by clicking the button below, then you'll be able to pause the video at any time and you'll be able to read all of the text that's shown on the pages during the video. Alternatively, you can go to the out of print archive in the link in the description below, where you can download full high-res scans of all of the pages to view on your iPad or on your computer. This issue is packed with lots of news and reviews from E3 and all the latest games, so let's get into the magazine. This month's cover features everybody's favourite Nintendo 64 game, Multi Racing Championship. Only joking, I have no idea why they chose to go with this cover, but I will point out that the reason there is a Banjo-Kazooie on the cover is because this issue came with a games tip booklet, and so that covered most of it in the shrink wrap. The back cover is an ad for Mario Kart 64, which I think is pretty sweet, and at the bottom of the page you can also see yet more teasing for Mother 3. The editor's letter this month is an odd one. News that Mario's face has been spotted on Mars, and also a mention that in this issue they will be bringing all the news from E3, which this year took place from Atlanta. The contents page has two of the best Nintendo 64 games from Rare, and to the right you can read news from the team, and this month it's all about playing Multi Racing Championship. Turning the page and you get to GoldenEye. The team were playing this at E3 and get this, they said that at first they weren't too sure about this game. They also mentioned the booth was very small and only had 6 screens, so it was quite easy to miss. There was no multiplayer on offer, however they hogged the booth for 3 hours and got dirty looks from Nintendo and the staff that were manning it. Needless to say, they were quickly started to love this game. The team then got to play Banjo-Kazooie, which they say is the better of Rare's 3D platformers on show, with the other being Conker in its early form. They also mentioned that they were slightly disappointed that it was very similar to Mario 64. So the team instantly had doubts about both GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie, but I can forgive them for this now that I'm older. Then they get on to Extreme G and say that they were amazed by it. Now I know it's a pretty good game, but the fact that they seem to prefer it over Banjo-Kazooie and GoldenEye is crazy. There's also a funny comment from a rep from Probe saying that he thinks that Extreme G is the new game which racers will be benchmarked against. F-Zero X is probably one of my favourite Nintendo 64 games ever. The team didn't get to play it, but they saw it in video form at E3 and a playable version was promised soon. Needless to say, they loved the look and couldn't wait to play it. Planet 64 brings us the overview from what Nintendo 64 fans can look forward to from E3, which had moved from LA to Atlanta this year. The team said Rare undoubtedly stole the show, and they said that GoldenEye's weapons library isn't as big as Turok's. Again, I'm sure that they regret saying this considering how big the GoldenEye arsenal ended up being. They also mentioned that their website now has a chat area and they list the best games from E3 for the Nintendo 64 and tell you where in the magazine you can find them. Turning over gives us lots of news. The updated Mario 64 and Wave Race carts in Japan are mentioned, as well as Hudson's new controller apparently unlocking a secret level in Bomberman 64 if you play the game with it. I don't know if this turned into reality, so if you do know, leave a comment below to let us know. There is also incredible news that Mortal Kombat Trilogy had actually sold out in the UK, despite being panned universally by critics. In the bottom left you can see a new range of Mario 64 themed snacks getting reviewed. The big news here, however, was that Star Fox 64, or Lilac Wars as we know it here in the UK, has been delayed until October. A small number of Mario Kart 64 carts here in the UK were also apparently broken in multiplayer, so there is contact details for you to get a free replacement. To the right is Retro World, where as usual some games from past systems get reviewed. Coming soon has all the big news from E3. Conker's Quest is mentioned as having a winter 1997 release, and in this early version of the game the magazine states it is very similar to Banjo-Kazooie, which makes you wonder why Rare were developing such a similar game alongside Banjo. This was the game before it underwent a huge change as we know, so it's interesting to read about. Body Harvest is also praised and it has been turned into an action RPG instead of being a plain old shoot 'em up, and Buggy Boogie is confirmed as still in development, but it appears to have undergone huge changes. Ken Griffey Baseball is called the most realistic baseball experience ever, which is pretty much the same line every sports title says when it's coming out. Yoshi's Island disappoints the magazine staff and attendees at E3 because yet again there was no playable version, however the team say it is looking great. Bomberman 64's multiplayer mode didn't wow guests as expected due to it being a simple update of the SNES classic. However, Space Station Silicon Valley got a lot of interest, and considering it's from the same makers as Lemmings, you had the feeling this was going to be one addictive puzzler. Funnily enough, Superman 64 is classed as looking very impressive, while Space Circus aka Starshot is also praised as being one to watch, although did only get to see this on a PC based version. Tetrasphere was apparently fun but slightly confusing to play, and Dual Heroes is praised for its innovative AI and nice frame rate, but Duke Nukem 64 is classed as a fun but disappointing port of the PC game. Lamborghini from Titus apparently has very twitchy controls which need work, and speaking of needing work, Clay Fighter 63 1/3 was also very buggy during the fights that the team enjoyed playing though. Robotech Crystal Dreams was covered favourably, and they mentioned they are looking forward to comparing it to Star Fox 64, although the graphics need cleaning up. Mission Impossible was also praised from its screenshots, although they were worried by the fact there was no playable version yet of the game despite it being due out for release in a few months. Zelda has some fantastic screenshots here, and many don't appear to be from the final build of the game. The game is also apparently 70% complete. Mother 3 is also mentioned as being up and running on the N64 DD and is coming close to completion, which as we know now was utter crap. Other RPGs get mentioned here, such as Pokemon 64 and Pokemon RPG, along with Mario RPG 2 in the red box. To the right, Fusoya also answers questions from fans about RPG news. The team got invited to WCW Studios and then play the new WCW vs NWO World Tour game, which they said was clunky but very fun, and they also made their way to the invite-only screening of Tonic Trouble, which they mentioned looked fantastic and very promising. As usual, the blue box in the middle throws up some interesting pieces, with a game called Ultra Soccer and a basketball game called Hardwood Heroes, which I assume never made it out. Game Japan section tells us that a song from Go-Go Troublemakers may actually go to the top of the Japanese music charts, and news that cosplay is exploding in Japan. There is also mention that Nintendo plans to sell 300,000 copies of Star Wars in Japan and expect 180,000 of those to sell immediately on launch. A funny story here is that in Japan the word for egg and sandwich apparently resemble Tamagotchi, so a local supermarket owner had 100 people queuing outside his store all night because it put a sign up saying that there will be a special Tamagotchi for the first 100 people the next day. When they opened and people realised it was an egg sandwich, you can naturally assume that they were pretty pissed. We'll take a quick break now, but when we come back we'll have reviews of Blast Corps, MRC, Hexen, Go-Go Troublemakers and many more. Blast Corps is pulled apart in this review, and the team go very in depth with the levels and give tips to help you play. They also included a cool comic strip style double page spread and gave the game a score of 88%, which I think is fair. The team say that they had to use the NTSC version of the cart for the review because the game had been delayed here in the UK. This was after they were promised a version to review, so they didn't want to let fans down, but they mentioned any differences that are in the PAL version will get a mention in a later issue. Oddly, MRC is classed as being brilliant, and yet they ended up giving it a score of just 81%. They had to use the North American cart for the review, but said that the game was far too easy, and this may be changed for the PAL release, as Japanese gamers generally prefer their games to be on the easy side. The control method using the analog stick is also heavily praised by the team, and they hope it forces other developers to really work on incorporating the analog stick in their future games. Hexen 64 is a lazy port of the PC Classic and was way out of date when this was released for the Nintendo 64. The team even go as far to say that you should just spend half as much money and buy the PC version of the game. The score of 69% I totally agree with. It's not a terrible game, and at times it can be fun and unique, but for the price this cost back in the day, it was nothing more than a cheap cash-in on the N64 fanbase who were desperate for new games to play. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of Go-Go Troublemakers, and despite it getting an incredible score of 90%, this game is still to many an unknown. I urge you, if you haven't played it yet, to give it a play. It's not the easiest game to get into, but when it clicks with you, you'll be unable to put it down, and it has some of the best boss battles seen in any N64 game. The score is well deserved, and I love the fact this was a 2D game in a console generation that tried to force 3D onto as many games as possible. Dark Rift is so dark that the team actually struggled to get clear screenshots for the review. They had to increase the contrast and brightness and change the gamma settings just to be able to play it, which got the review off to a bad start, which didn't help. The game is panned as being pretty plain and lacking anything to make it stand out. They also mentioned that the sound was very bad and slammed the game with a score of 72%, which I think was generous given how weak the game is. They also do a quick review of the Japanese Shadows of the Empire game, but if you've seen any previous episodes of this show, you'll have already seen the Western release of the game. Tim Weaver, who is one of my favourite writers for the magazine, writes a guide about how to survive the E3 show. He writes a very interesting and funny day-to-day guide to the show, which I urge you all to read. If you want to feel very old, you will also notice the Men in Black 1 movie advert here. Where the hell have all those years gone? Back in issue 3, the magazine held a contest to design a new controller add-on, and you can see the winner right here, as well as some interesting runners-up. Funnily enough, the team member who was supposed to pick the winner went on holiday and didn't tell anyone, leaving the team to rush and plough through the huge pile of entrants to find the winner. With just a few days left on my reign as this month's Games Master, here is a useful guide on how to become a Mario Kart 64 Pro and how to cheat to win. This should come in handy for anyone who is trying to beat my crown. This also leads into the magazine's own contest where they were having a Mario Kart 64 Championship. Finishing off the past few issues guide to Mario 64 is this set of pages for the last few stages in the game. As always, if you want to read these or download the scans, there is a link in the description. N64 hotline callers had been asking for tips for Mario Kart 64 and Killer Instinct Gold mostly this month, so the featured tips are from these games. Tips Extra has tips for Shadows of the Empire, and the Reader's Tips show you how to beat Cooper the Quick with a time of 0 seconds, and many other great games such as Turok. A fan also writes a tip on holidays which was quite funny. Club 64 is always my favourite section of the magazine, reading all of the letters that people have sent in. One French reader says he's heard that Zelda carts are so big that Nintendo won't make them for Europe because Japan and the USA have priority, and that he will kill those Japanese dogs if they do this to him. A fan also mentions that he gets sick when playing Turok, and the magazine state that other editors from this magazine and others that they work with have also felt nauseous whilst playing the game. A fan also complains that he completed Mario Kart 64 in a few hours, and in this month's late magazine was blamed on an editor leaving it on the bus whilst taking it to print. I love the excuses they made almost all the time for this magazine being late to print. Dream On has some excellent ideas for games like a downhill mountain biking game, but also some terrible suggestions such as a Postman Pat game. If you're one of my international viewers, I suggest you Google Postman Pat, and then you'll realise the person who wrote this must be on crack if they think that this would make a great N64 game. As always, the directory features a list of all games which have been reviewed in previous magazines along with their scores. In previous issues of the magazine, they've covered the North American game scene and also the Japanese game scene from the eyes of the developers from those countries. In this issue, they finally get around to looking at Europe, and this is definitely worth taking a look at, so I suggest you either pause the screen in HD or download so you can read what each of the developers from Europe are thinking about working on the Nintendo 64 console and which games they've got in the pipeline for the months ahead. Next month promises to have a huge feature on what the hell is going on with the Nintendo 64 RPGs, and every RPG in development will be discussed. So thank you all for watching. If you do go over to my Facebook fan page in the link in the description below, you do still have a short amount of time left where you can enter by liking my Facebook fan page to win this sealed copy of the N64 Ocarina of Time soundtrack, and this was for the 3DS. Great prize, and I hope to see you soon. Please leave a comment if you've enjoyed the show. I reply to everybody, and don't forget to hit that like button.